Die Netcon, innere Sicherheit und die Frage nach der Kompatibilität des Islam mit westlichen Werten. Die Netcon-Konferenz stand dieses Jahr unter einem klaren Hauptthema: innere Sicherheit und die Rolle des Islam in westlichen Gesellschaften. Immer wieder wurde die zentrale Frage gestellt, ob der Islam überhaupt mit den Werten von Freiheit, Demokratie und Rechtsstaatlichkeit vereinbar ist und ob die Vereinigten Staaten nicht längst in dieselbe Richtung abgleiten wie Europa und das Vereinigte Königreich.
We must find a way to make this an official holiday for Prophet Muhammad. That is
thank you.
And continue to accomplish.
Allah the Almighty introduced him in the Quran. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Muhammad is mercy for all, not only for the Muslims, not for the Jews, not for the Christians, not for others, no, but all.
The Prophet ﷺ taught us through his life example that true faith is
Die unterschätzte Gefahr. Im direkten Gespräch mit Rednern wie Tom Homan, Jack Posobiec und Dr. Fonte, aber auch mit vielen Teilnehmern, zeigte sich ein einhelliges Bild. Die Gefahr durch islamische Ideologie ist real. Während viele Amerikaner noch im Wunschdenken verharren, sie seien besser vor Entwicklungen geschützt als Europa, warnten die europäischen Stimmen vor Ort eindringlich. Die USA hinken nicht hinterher, sie folgen demselben Weg.
Mr. Grigorian, I heard your amazing speech here at the summit, and I wanted to ask you for our European audience, where do you see the biggest issue of the immigration crisis what we have in Europe, especially in the UK? You mentioned the boats were coming into England to Dover, but also over the land to Germany. So where do you see the most critics in this whole scenario?
Well, I mean, the first thing that will occur to people is the disorder. Is the boats coming across the channel? Or back in 2015, you know, Angela Merkel's invitation to illegal immigrants. So it's that environment of disorder and lawlessness that initially concerns people. But then once you have large immigrant communities, especially if they're lower skilled communities with very, very different cultural perspectives. And, you know, let's just be honest here, we're talking about Muslims, you know, less educated Muslims. The United States has a not insignificant amount of Muslim immigration as well, although numerically we actually have fewer Muslims in the United States than France does, even though our population is 5 times larger. But regardless, separate from the numbers, it's much more educated. I mean, we got people who were professors and engineers and what have you, and that results in a different dynamic than in Germany or in Britain or in France. And so my point here is that the initial concern is the lawlessness and disorder of people coming in who shouldn't be. But then the thing that, you know, strikes people in the face is the conduct of the immigrants once they're there, and the government's response to them. So there's always going to be people who are misbehaving. I mean, whether they're natives or not or whatever. The question is, what is the response? And, you know, if, for instance, with that Scottish girl, they arrested the girl and not the gypsy predator who was, you know, trying to proposition a 12-year-old girl, when that kind of, what they, in England they call two-tier policing, and it's the same kind of phenomenon you see in Germany and elsewhere, that then becomes the real issue. So that even if the state does a better job of controlling the immigration flow, the issue doesn't go away, and if anything becomes even more contentious because of both the way the immigrants are behaving and the way the government responds to that kind of misbehavior.
I'm very lucky that you mentioned the two-tier justice, what is happening in Europe and especially in the UK. So where do you see the United States of America dealing better with that problem? Because we see some of those kinds of crimes starting. We had this case in Minnesota with the Somalian man who raped the 12-year-old child, and then the Islamic Center wrote a letter and said, hey, he just
didn't know that you shouldn't rape 12-year-old girls. I mean, it's unbelievable. I'd say that we're facing the same kinds of problems as Europe. There's no question about that. And frankly, it's not even just us. Australia, Israel, any country that immigrants end up going to, any sort of democratic country, faces the same kind of issues. But, you know, and I say this with no pleasure, but I'm just very happy we have our problems and not your problems, because the issues are just much more problematic in Europe than they are in the United States. Yes, we have some of the same issues, you know, crime issues. There's a certain amount of, you know, migrants being treated with kid gloves and, you know, getting a kind of special treatment. There is a certain amount of that. It's just a lot less. It's a much smaller problem, both because most of our even illegal immigrants don't come here with a kind of oppositional attitude toward the country. Most of our immigrants are either Latin American, so they're all Christian. A lot of them are even Protestant, coming from Latin America, or they're from East or South Asia, but not Muslim, generally speaking. And like I said before, even most of our Muslim immigrants, with exceptions like the Somalis, are better educated people. And so, again, what we're facing is the same kind of thing as in Europe, but a much smaller thing. In other words, it's a difference of degree, even though some of the same problems exist.
So you don't think that it's just a time issue, because we are 10 years ahead. So Merkel opened the gates in 2015, and now we have this huge crisis. But you also have now a campaigner running in New York, who is in the code of socialism, like he says he's a liberal and he wants to bring social democracy.
He's a communist,
but but he also promotes Sharia law, so he's hiding this a little bit. So do you think that it's that you don't have to stop this cancer growing in the early stages, what is coming now in America, or you just think, no, we'll never have this kind of problem?
Oh, I'll never say never, because people used to say, for instance, with regard to birth rates, we were different from Europe. We didn't have that problem. And then, you know, 10 years later, our birth rates went down too. So, or the secularization. Europe basically became much less religious. The United States stayed, and frankly, is still more religious than Europe, but secularism happened here, it just happened later. So I never say never. But I think there are factors that suggest we can keep the problem relatively small, even though we're not going to be able to eliminate it. The problem's always going to exist, but I think we can successfully keep it small in a way that Germany and Britain and France and the Netherlands and everywhere else have not, really can't, just because of who they're letting in, where they're coming from. And in a sense, look, Europe exists as Europe in opposition to Islam over 1,000 years. That is kind of what made Europe. That's not really the same thing for us. There's a little bit of that with regard to Latin America, and the Mexicans lost, you know, northern Mexico, although there were no Mexicans living there. But it's not the same thing. And so we are facing, again, a problem that is we are facing a problem that's qualitatively similar, but quantitatively much smaller and much less serious.
Mr. Fonte, what is your opinion about the actual situation in Europe, especially Germany and the UK, with the immigration crisis?
Yes, well, I would say the big philosophical, historical picture, this is a struggle between democracy and transnationalism. It's a question of who should rule. Should the people rule, or institutions, various elite institutions? The people want to limit immigration everywhere in Europe, every country, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Netherlands, Italy, everywhere. And in all these countries, elite elements, particularly what we could call progressive left elites, have for the past well, let's say 30 years, 40 years, particularly since the big influx in 2016, have favored mass immigration from countries and cultures very different from Western Europe, where the people want to basically want to restrict immigration or stop it in that sense. They don't want huge masses of people with foreign cultures, very different from their own, coming in and swamping the country. So if the people rule, it's a democracy, you wouldn't have this mass immigration. But since you have what I would call it a post-democracy, after democracy, that's what the elites are doing in Germany, in France, in the United Kingdom. They're ignoring the rule of the people, they're ignoring the will of the people, and letting masses, millions of foreigners in. What Merkel said, we schaffen das. It turned out that it's not something that it didn't work. It didn't fix. It continues, and the same is what's going on in France, and certainly the United Kingdom. So that's the issue. It's really who decides, the people or elites. So you're a democracy or not a democracy.
My second question...
You could say Dr. Fonte, they like that in Germany.
Okay, Dr. Fonte. My second question would be, maybe you heard about the Epping case in the UK where protesters, mostly mothers and fathers, were protesting in front of a migrant hotel where a migrant was put in who raped a child, and then it escalated so much that they went in front of court to decide if the migrants has to leave this hotel or not. The court decided in favor of the migrants. So is this not actually a proof what you said with that the government, the elites, are not actually listening to the will of the people anymore?
Yes, absolutely. The Labour government supported the migrants, and originally I think the judges, if I remember the case correctly, the judges originally were leaning toward the people and toward the closing the migrant hotels, originally sort of agreeing with the women and the mothers in that area. But I think pressure was exerted by the Labour government they said we have to house these migrants because we're following the European Convention on Human Rights. Great UK is a member of the European Convention on Human Rights, and we have to fulfill our duties under this treaty and take care of these migrants. So that's what they use. But what is the European Convention? It's again, this is a group of elitist judges in the European Convention on Human Rights. That's the treaty. But the court itself then makes decisions basically against the will of the people and against even common sense. In this sense, why would you import many criminals? Some people aren't, but there's also a criminal group. And why wouldn't you stop this? Why wouldn't you prevent it? So this too is what I was saying. This is an attack on democracy.
What would you recommend to the European people? Because now we have a lot of movements in the UK. They're rising up. The people rising up. They promote it as the lion awakes.
Right.
And what is your tip for them? Because the UK is a melting pot right now, and everyone is talking about, if they're gonna stop, for example, the rally on the 13th of September. It's a big rally planned, and then they will start a revolution. So what is your tip, or what would you recommend those people who
they still have elections, so they can organize politically, but they should vote these people out when they have a chance. They will have a chance. I mean, they voted them in. They had voted in Britain and in the UK. They had a conservative government which didn't fulfill its promise. Its promise was to stop illegal immigration and restrict it, and they didn't do that. So they were voted out. Labour came in. Labour's even following policies that are just as bad or worse. But right now, if there's an election today, Nigel Farage would win, the Reform Party, which wants to stop illegal immigration. That's what Farage is talking about. So you might have to wait a couple years there, but if there's a number election, I would say vote for people that want to support democratic policies, and that would include democratic nationalism. All nationalism is not bad. It can mean patriotism, love of country. As long as it's democratic and peaceful, that's fine. So that would be the same thing in France or Germany. They should vote these people out and vote for somebody that wants to stop immigration.
Mr. Przowiak, thank you for having you on our show. So what do you think about the situation right now in the UK? Because it seems like the United Kingdom becomes more and more like North Korea.
Well, the issue of freedom of speech in the UK is absolutely horrific, and when you combine that with the migrant crisis that the UK is going through right now, it's really sad. And to say this as an American, to see the country where all of our freedoms, all these ideas of freedom of speech, of the right of your nation to exist, all of this comes from the great work that came out of England, and England, of course, founded the U.S. colonies, and that's where we got the United States of America from. So all of this political tradition goes back to these great English thinkers. And then to see the UK sit there and start arresting people for tweets and arresting people for cartoons and throwing mothers in jail, it's absolutely horrific. It's horrifying. This is something that you would expect to see out of Russia, and yet Russia is painted as some, this authoritarian dictatorship. Well, who are you to call them that when you're locking up people for tweets, including a comedian, a guy who, by the way, I wasn't actually, we've gotten into a few disagreements online, but who cares? Of course, I support his right to have freedom of speech. I was recently I was doing a layover in Heathrow Airport, and so I was wondering if I could play some games with this. So I started tweeting Bible verses out to see if there are any issues that Keir Starmer would have with me tweeting out just some basic Bible verses about, I don't know, immigrants. And then I said, well, if that doesn't work, maybe I can tweet some verses from the Quran as well. But no, England absolutely needs to be the place where freedom of speech is defended, where the rights of the nation are defended, and I hope and I pray that Nigel Farage is the man who's able to step up and take that mantle of returning Great Britain to its roots.
So what do you think when we now go more on the mainland in Europe and especially Germany? Because in Germany we had the CEO of Deutschland-Kurier who had to go in front of court for making a sarcastic meme about our former Minister of Inner Affairs. So what do you think after seeing actually J.D. Vance and Mr. Rubio talking about how Germany is violating human rights and freedom of speech? What is your point on that?
Well, that's exactly right. And I was there at the Munich conference where J.D. gave his speech. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and I think it's true. Europe is the place where American culture and Western civilization was born. There's no question. And so these ideas that we have of human rights, which are given to us by God, they are not given to us by government. Government infringes upon these rights and takes away the rights of, and in this case is taking away the rights of the German people. And the German people have a right to freedom of speech. The German people have a right to their homeland. The German people have a right to their identity. Every single nation around the world has this right. And when a government comes in and infringes upon it, as is being done now in Germany, it should always be called out. And people who love freedom around the world should always stand with the rights of those people.
What do you think about our politician who had the idea to delete the German flag and the German anthem?
It's ridiculous. Going after flags, going after anthems is never a good road to go in. This is revisionism, and this is a form of cultural revolution. When cultural revolutions take over a country, what is the first thing they do is they destabilize the country, they destabilize the population, and then they begin going after the symbols of the nation. The symbols of the flag here in the United States, that's what they go after. They degrade the flag, they disgrace the flag, they kneel for the national anthem, they attack the national anthem. They try to create new national anthems. This is exactly what communist revolutionaries have done all around the world. They've been doing it for hundreds of years, and now they do it under, in the past, of course, it was done under the name of class equality. Well, now it's being done in the name of gender and ethnicity and cultural equity, but it's the same exact thing.
If you would have a chance to give a message to our European audience in the UK and in Germany, what would that be?
Keep fighting, and we are with you. If we can win in the United States, we can win everywhere, and your fight is our fight.
Europa und das Vereinigte Königreich sind rund 10 Jahre voraus. Dort haben sich Parallelgesellschaften, Gewaltwellen, Grooming-Gangs und islamistische Netzwerke längst etabliert. Ein Beispiel aus den USA. Der Fall Minnesota, wo ein somalischer Immigrant ein 12-jähriges Kind missbrauchte und ein Islam-Center ihn mit dem Argument verteidigte, er wisse nicht, dass es verboten sei. Zeigt, die ersten Anzeichen sind bereits in den USA angekommen. Moscheen, Burkas und politische Scharia. Besonders eindrücklich schilderten Teilnehmer ihre eigenen Beobachtungen. In Florida und Texas wachsen neue Megamoscheen wie Pilze aus dem Boden. Burkas und Kopftücher prägen die Nachbarschaft zunehmend. Und in New York kandidiert ein Bürgermeister, der unter dem Deckmantel von Sozialismus und Kommunismus tatsächlich eine islamische Agenda und Scharia-Ideologie vorantreibt.
So, I have a question to Mr. Hansen. I would like to ask about the comment you made suggesting that the United States handles the importation of U-term Islamic night-swing murderers and child molesters better than the UK and Europe. I found this remark a little bit inappropriate, particularly in light of the suffering endured by over 100,000 victims in the UK over recent decades, as well as thousands in my home country, Germany, including the tragic cases like the 16-year-old girl who was abused by illegal immigrants and fatally pushed onto a train track by a Syrian man and died. Given recent development in the United States, such as the incident in Minnesota, where an Islamic community center reportedly sought to protect an immigrant regardless of his legal status, accused of abusing a 12-year-old child who was eventually Muslim. And when you go to Texas, the proliferation of large mosques across in Texas were popping up there everywhere, like those super mosques. And then the promotion of Sharia law by a minority candidate in New York City, one of the nation's most prominent cities. I must really ask you, in what specific ways do you believe the United States is faring better than Europe and the UK in this regard? You actually do the same mistakes what we do.
Was that question directed at me? Sorry, I missed the start.
Hansen.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think the US is doing a particularly good job, but I think we're demonstrably doing better than the UK for certain. And Germany as well. I mean, Germany had the incidents around Köln on the Christmas attacks there, and plenty of others. And there's basically two tiers of justice in both Germany and the UK. We have problems here in the United States, but I would put the stats on that in stark contrast. I bet it was an order of magnitude worse in either of those countries and most of Europe. Brussels, has Molenbeek is a hellhole in Europe. There are plenty of places where this is a demonstrably worse problem. And I think we're waking up to it and taking action, but I don't think we're anywhere near as far down the path of submission as the bulk of Europe.
I'll echo that by saying that many of our friends and counterparts in Europe view that their countries are functionally lost, and they're warning us on what to do. I just spent a week and a half with some British guys, and they were just apoplectic about how far down the road they are and warning us to, we have to fix it so that we don't fall for their. So I think not in Europe and here, I think that is a common viewpoint that Europe is further down this path than we are. A lot of it is population density. It depends on where you're at in the United States. If you're in Kansas, you may rarely see Muslims, but it's harder to do that in the UK. It's harder to do that in Germany because of the population density issue that they have there. But I would agree. I think that we have a chance, and we can come back from this, and we need to address it in our public policy.
They also have Sharia courts in the UK. We don't have that here. We just don't have Sharia courts. I mean, we have problems, but that is one of the blessings of immigrant.
Look, I think I appreciate the spirit of your question, because I think what you're getting at is that we're all in this combat together. I think there's a time slice difference we're at in terms of the level of the population. There are some aspects that, just because of the nature of this country and how vast it is, that make the problem far more disparate. But what I really think that we have to escape from in this country is the notion that that's just something that's happened over there. We can look at it, we can kind of have perhaps a schadenfreude about it, perhaps some kind of mimetic rivalry that emerges from, we're going to do things better over here. But it's the same civilizational combat. We come at it from a slightly different standpoint because of the nature of our legal tradition, the nature of being a new world country as opposed to an old one. but it is part of the same combat. And the more that we know and understand, I think, what goes on in Western Europe, the better we'll be able to pinpoint and know what to look for, what is likely already happening here.
Noch ist die USA quantitativ nicht auf dem Niveau Europas. Qualitativ jedoch, so waren sich viele einig, ist der Weg bereits vorangezeichnet. What do you think about the current situation with freedom of speech in your country?
Well, I'm sure the Germans can relate, having lived under an iron curtain for the best part of a century. We now live under a digital iron curtain that has been constructed with the help of the European Union's Digital Services Act, of course, placing top-down pressure on Silicon Valley and the Biden administration. There's disinformation governance boards and putting intelligence agents inside places like Meta and Twitter, but also our own government. For years we've had legislation build up from even back to Margaret Thatcher in 1986, like the Public Order Act, the Malicious Communications Act, the Communications Act, and now the Online Safety Act passed in 2023 to censor, suppress, and criminalize the speech of your everyday concerned citizen. And that means that 12,000 people are arrested every year. That's 30 a day for posts made online or speech in person. And that's actually an underestimate because some police forces didn't confess the data of how much they're cracking down on us in an Orwellian fashion when asked. And the government only want to make this worse. We've now got ministers and civil servants from the Department for Science and Technology sending emails last year in the height of the protests and riots after the Southport massacres to the likes of TikTok, saying, can you censor mentions of fighting age male asylum seekers and calling Keir Starmer to Keir? And now they've weaponized a 2017 intelligence and counter-insurgency unit that used AI at the time to identify ISIS fighters and jihadist videos to now track anti-migrant sentiment online and the concerned parents showing up at protests in places like Epping or Canary Wharf, protesting against illegal migrant sex offenders. It just so happens today, as we're talking, that the Ethiopian illegal migrant whose act of predation on a 14-year-old girl kicked off the protests at the Bell Hotel in Epping has just been convicted of sexual offences. Bear in mind how soft the judiciary are in the UK. The prosecutor said, well, he was of good character because he didn't have any prior offences. The guy landed in our country 8 days earlier and had also sexually assaulted another woman who appeared at court to give her testimony. So they're not sending their best. We shouldn't be housing these people at our expense, but to even say that invites the threat of arrest, as we've just seen with something as tepid as Graham Linehan being on the right side of the trans issue, talking about the Supreme Court verdict that said, men can't become women. In my country, that issue was settled. Graham Linehan was opposing men identifying as women, going into women's spaces, said women should defend themselves, said that transsexual activists are bigoted, hateful, misogynistic, and homophobic. And for 3 tweets, he was arrested when he stepped off a plane from Arizona to Heathrow in London by 5 armed guards. And the stress was so much that it put him in the hospital with high blood pressure. So what we're seeing here is the British state will protect their client groups, which is basically illegal migrant criminals, and they will do so by criminalizing whatever negative opinions you have of them up until the point of the threat of, or even death for the likes of Peter Lynch, a grandfather who died in prison doing nothing but peacefully protesting against the 2-tier system we now live under.
So when you see all those demographic changes, what's happening in the United Kingdom, you already have statistic which says that Mohammed is one of the most used names in Wales and England, and then you have all those counter strategies from the government which says, oh, you can't say something about Islam, it's Islamophobia, that's a crime, we're gonna implement blasphemy laws. So what do you think about how much longer can the United Kingdom survive as a Western value country, or does it go that far what J.D. Vance said, that it will be the first Islamic nuclear power?
Well, I think it'd be the second because Pakistan has nukes, but if we're importing the population of Pakistan, I think we're probably quite closely behind them. You're right to link demographic and thereby cultural change to censorship measures, because the entire reason that hate speech laws are implemented in the first place is because you have a population that is sensitive to concerns of hate or criticism that demands said hate speech laws, like Islamophobia. Islamophobia, by the way, being a term that was invented by the Muslim Brotherhood to insulate Islam from criticism so that they couldn't be criticized for being terrorists, for wanting to install a caliphate after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and they established themselves in 1928, and they just copied the successful activism of gay rights activists and Jews following the Holocaust to say, you can't be homophobic or anti-Semitic to us. Well, they said, well, you can't be Islamophobic to us, even though by the liberal standard, Islam is pretty against Jews and gays. But yes, so am I worried about demographic change irreparably terraforming Britain? Of course I am. If our politicians don't tackle the millions of people that they've brought in over the last couple of decades who have no inclination, no desire to submit their cultures of their homelands to my culture, who have no desire to form good relationships with the people of our country and integrate into the national tribe, if they don't send these people home, either through encouragement by banning the deleterious effects of their lifestyles like halal slaughter or wearing the hijab, or of course evicting all of the illegal migrants and foreign criminals in my country. There's about 2 million of them. There was 1.2 million as estimated in 2017, and migration has like trebled since then, so there's obviously lots of them here. If they don't start doing that, then the next permanent settlement will be unilateral multiculturalism. It will be the erasure of British culture or identity. It will become English people being an ethnic minority in their own country. And I happen to think, just like the jizya is imposed on Jews and Christians in Islamic countries, that the Muslim majority that could emerge after 2063, especially with a violent caliphist revolution, won't be so keen on protecting the human rights of the minority English, just as the majority English are so keen through their liberal values on protecting minority rights for Muslims and the like.
And when we see now the political shift, what's happening in your country, so there is a lot of patriotic movement right now. We have the Operation Raise the Colors, and then we have Reform Party under Nigel Farage, who just declared his plan of deportations. And then we have other parties popping up, like Advanced UK. Do you think that all those little fractures of conservative movements and parties are actually helpful? Because when we look into like military strategies, then you can always quote Caesar with divide and conquer. What is your take on that?
So Operation Raise the Colours is very interesting because all it is putting up the national flag. And so if your nation's flag becomes a protest symbol in your own country and the government is tearing it down, it shows you just how bad things have gotten in Britain. And it's no wonder these flags aren't present in areas like Birmingham or Canary Wharf, because the English aren't present there. If you look at demographic maps, they're in a minority. And so foreign flags are actually representative of the people living there. So the problem is the people living there and the treacherous Anglophobic left-wingers that are running our countries that, as George Orwell famously once quipped, would sooner be seen stealing from a poor box than sing God Save the King. The problem is those people, not the flags and the patriotic Brits that are putting them up. As far as the political movements go, I've seen some encouraging things come out of reform recently. I've been a critical friend, as I've said. I've been as much carrot as I have stick. I want to see them live up to their potential, considering they're consistently topping the polls, and they have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to disrupt the sclerotic uniparty that has betrayed our country. Nigel Farage testified before Congress while we're out here in Washington, D.C., and he did a very good job warning that Britain is becoming something akin to woke North Korea, a total pariah state clamping down on the freedom of speech of its citizens. And yes, after much pressure from the likes of myself, Stephen Edgington, and my friends, they have realised that mass deportations is both a necessary policy and a vote winner. Now, there is now an arms race between them and other politicians. Robert Jenrick, who is the Conservative leader in waiting when Kemi Badenoch is inevitably cleared out for her poor performance, has today come out in the Telegraph and said, I think we should have a decade or more of net emigration, legal emigration, as well as mass deportations, not just of all the fighting age men that Nigel Farage has targeted, but also of families, the women and children who are also party to crimes and are illegal migrants themselves, because otherwise you're raising a generation of illegal migrants who, of course, resent the fact that their dad has been shipped off overseas and so are more likely to commit crimes in our country, as many of the children of refugees across Europe have done, not least of all, of course, in Germany. So what you're seeing is whether or not Jenrick himself is credible, whether or not Ben Habib's Advance Party has any hope of winning the next election, whether or not Rupert Lowe is politically homeless after being kicked out of Reform and now just has Restore Britain, a very successful, incredible pressure movement, but not one that can be elected. Whether or not any of these can present a challenge to Reform electorally, I have my doubts at the moment, but it shows that in this arms race, momentum is on our side. It shows that not only are these the morally right policies, not only are they possible with some clever wonks sat behind a desk working out the numbers and how to amend certain laws, but it shows they're actually vote winners. Just like Donald Trump won a majority of Hispanic males, promising mass deportations. People know what time it is. People are very sensible. These are not beyond the pale and fringe things, and that it's just the media class and the political class who would happily see this untenable policy of demographic erasure and cultural replacement going on. They're the only ones that think this is racist and inexcusable. Stop pandering them. they're your enemies. Listen to the people instead and we'll have a functioning country.
And we are now at the NetCon in the United States in Washington, D.C. So as a British fella, what do you think about what the Americans see about Islamism, and what do you think about the whole convention? Was it a good thing to come? Are you happy that you're here?
I always enjoy coming. It's hosted by Yoram Hazony, who's an absolute gentleman and who is a pan-nationalist. I have this line recently saying, I basically just want what the Israeli government has, which is, high GDP per capita, a competent military, a strong sense of yourself as a people, ethnically, culturally, religiously, and high birth rates, because that's a real problem in all our respective countries. And he is very much the same. Like, he doesn't even like the phrase Judeo-Christian, for example, because he wants Jewish people to be Jewish and Christian people to be Christian. He doesn't want an ambiguity between the cultures to be dissolving them in some sort of liberal milieu that our enemy all practice. As far as what America's doing, I mean, they're very successful. I know they have a habit of like franchising McDonald's and KFC across my country. Can you franchise nationalism too, please? Like, we'd like to steal some notes from the Trump revolution and bring it back overseas, which I would wager is what Nigel Farage probably talked to Donald Trump about in his Oval Office meeting just a few hours ago. As far as Islam, I don't think the Americans quite understand it yet. You've got some very solid voices. They had a panel on the rising threat of Islamism in the United States. But one person decided on the panel to make a joke about how much worse things are in Europe, how Europe has fallen, how England is handing all of its girls over to these gruesome Pakistani rape gangs, and the fact they've been covered up by our politicians. But what they fail to understand is, guys, by allowing Minneapolis to become Little Mogadishu, by allowing Dearborn, Michigan to become the first Arab-majority city, you guys are going to have your grooming gangs too. There's probably already an epidemic of Sharia court-enforced child marriages happening across your country. You're probably already getting brides brought in from around the world in arranged marriages that are unable to escape these sort of like sexual enslavement conditions. You guys have probably already got this happening, but you just haven't gone into these communities because you want to practice religious freedom. I mean, the founders would be appalled that this is happening. Religious freedom meant freedom of Christian denomination. It did not mean a worship of an alien culture that wants to conquer your country and turn it into a caliphate. And so I think the Americans need to, first of all, understand that you cannot live with this hostile foreign culture festering in your country. And then, even if they think they're a propositional nation, which they aren't, they're a Anglo-Protestant nation from the founding, but even if they think it's just a piece of paper, a constitution, well, enforce the constitution, enforce the proposition. Make it so that people who have been granted visas or been naturalized with citizenship, if they have broken their oath, if they do still hold allegiances to foreign princes and principalities, if they want to irreparably change the culture and faith of the United States, they must leave, and no more must come in. And I can tell you this is urgent, because whenever I land in DC dollars, it's like a refugee camp. Like, get a handle on it, guys. You're about 10 years behind us, and if you don't change things right now, this warning that you're saying Britain has become, well, if you don't listen to the warning, you'll become it too.
Extremistisches Gedankengut, Messerattacken und die ersten Strukturen von Grooming Gangs sind bereits da. Die entscheidende Frage ist, ob Amerika diese Entwicklung im Keim ersticken kann oder ob es denselben Weg Europa und das Vereinigte Königreich nimmt.